Molly Moon's Incredible Book of Hypnosis. Chapter 1. Molly Moon looked down at her pink blotchy legs. It wasn't the bath water that was making them mottled like spam. They were always that color, and so skinny. Maybe one day, like an ugly duckling turning into a swan, her knock-kneed legs might grow into the most beautiful legs in the world. Some hope. Molly leaned back until her curly brown hair and her ears were under water. She stared at the fluorescent strip lights above her, at the fly-filled yellow paint that was peeling off the wall, and at the damp patch on the ceiling where the strange mushrooms grew. Water filled her ears, and the world sounded foggy and far away. Molly shut her eyes. It was an ordinary November evening, and she was in the shabby bathroom in a crumbling house called Hardwick House. She imagined flying over it like a bird, looking down at its grey slate roof and its bramble-filled garden. She imagined flying higher and higher until she was looking down on the hillside where Hardwick village lay. Up and up she went until Hardwick House became tiny. She could see the whole of the town of Bearsville beyond it, and as Molly flew higher and higher, she saw the rest of the country, and now the coastline too, with the sea on all sides. Her mind rocketed upwards until she was flying in space, looking down at the earth, and there she hovered. Molly liked to fly away from the world in her imagination. It was relaxing, and often, when she was in this state, she'd feel different. She had this special feeling tonight, as if something exciting or strange was about to happen to her. The last time she'd felt special, she had found a half-eaten packet of sweets on the pavement in the village. The time before, she had gotten away with watching 2 hours of evening television instead of 1. Molly wondered what surprise would greet her this time. Then she opened her eyes, and she was back in the bath. Molly looked at the distorted reflection on the underside of the chrome tap. Oh dear, surely she wasn't as ugly as that. Was that pink lump of dough her face? Was that potato her nose? Were those small green lights her eyes? Someone was hammering downstairs. That was strange. No one ever mended anything here. Then Molly realized that the hammering was someone banging on the bathroom door. Trouble! Molly shot up and hit her head on the tap. The banging outside was very loud now, and with it came a fierce bark. Molly Moon, you will open this door at once. If you don't, I'll be forced to use the master key. Molly could hear keys rattling on a ring. She looked at the level of the bathwater and gasped. It was much too deep and well over the allowed level. She jumped up, pulling the plug out, and as she did, she reached for her towel. Just in time. The door swung open. Miss Adderson was in and darting like an adder to the bathtub, her scaly nose wrinkling. She discovered the deep draining water. She rolled up her crinoline sleeve and pushed the plug back in. As I suspected, she said. Intentional flouting of orphanage rules. Miss Adderson's eyes glinted spitefully as she took a tape measure from her pocket. She pulled the metal strip out, and making excited slurping noises as she sucked on her loose false teeth. She measured how far Molly's bathwater had gone over the red line painted around the bottom of the tub. Molly's teeth chattered. Her knees were now turning blue and blotchy. Despite an icy draft that was coming through a crack in the window pane, the palms of her hands began sweating, as they always did whenever she was excited or nervous. Miss Adderson shook the tape measure, dried it on Molly's shirt, then snapped it shut. Molly braced herself to face the wiry spinster, who, with her short grey hair and hairy face, looked more like a mister than a miss. Your bath is 30 centimeters deep, Miss Adderson announced, allowing for that amount that had already deceitfully run away. While I was knocking on the door, I calculate that your bath was actually 40 centimeters deep. You know that baths are only supposed to be 10 centimeters deep. Your bath was 4 times that deep, so you, in effect, have used up your next 3 baths. So, Molly, you are forbidden to have a bath for the next 3 weeks. As for a punishment, Miss Adderson picked up Molly's toothbrush. Molly's tooth sank. Molly's heart sank. She knew what was coming next. Miss Adderson's favorite punishment. Miss Addison glared at Molly with her dull black eyes. Her face heaved in a monstrous way as her tongue dislodged her teeth and moved them around her mouth before setting them back down on her gums. She thrust the toothbrush at Molly. "This week you will be toilet monitor. I want the toilet spotless, Molly, and this is the brush you will be using. And don't think you can get away with using the toilet brush, because I'll be watching you." Miss Addison gave one last satisfied suck on her teeth and left the room. Molly slumped down on the side of the bath. So the something she had felt was going to happen tonight was simply trouble. She stared at the manky toothbrush, hoping her friend Rocky would let her share his. As she picked at the loose thread on her grey, balding old towel, she wondered what it was like being wrapped up in a fluffy white towel, like the ones on TV adverts. "Softness is the sign. Everyone feels fine. Wash your towels in Cloud 9. Molly loved adverts. They showed how comfortable life could be, lifting her out of her world into theirs. A lot of ads were silly, but Molly had her favourites, which weren't. These ones were filled with friends who were always happy to see Molly when she visited them in her mind. "Wrap yourself in luxury time, Cloud 9. Molly was shaken from her towel daydream as the evening assembly bell rang. Molly winced. She was late, as always late, forever in trouble. All the other kids called Molly Accident Zone, or Zono, because she was clumsy, uncoordinated, and accident-prone. Her other nicknames were Drono, since people said Molly's voice made them want to fall asleep, and Boogie Eyes, because her eyes were dark green and close together. Only Rocky, her best friend, and some of the younger orphans called her Molly. "Molly! Molly!" Across the corridor, which was now being stampeded by children rushing downstairs, Molly saw Rocky's brown, dark face, framed with his black curls, beckoning her to hurry. Molly grabbed her toothbrush and ran to the bedroom, which she shared with two girls called Hazel and Cynthia. As she crossed the corridor, two older boys, Roger Fibbin and Gordon Boyles, ran into her and pushed her roughly aside. "Get out of the way, Zono! Move it, Drono!" "Quick, Molly," said Rocky, who was shoving his feet into his slippers. "We can't be late again. Alderstone will have a fit. Mind you, then she might choke on her false teeth." He smiled encouragingly at Molly as she searched for her pajamas. Rocky always knew how to cheer her up. He knew her so well, and this is how. Both Molly and Rocky had arrived at Hardwick House 10 summers ago, a white baby and a black baby. Molly had been found in a cardboard box in the doorstep by Miss Addison, whilst Rocky had been found in the top part of a pram in the car park behind Burrsville Police Station, found because he had been heard yelling at the top of his voice. Miss Addison didn't like babies. To her they were noisy, smelly, squelchy creatures, and the idea of having to change a nappy filled her with disgust. So Miss Trinkleberry, a shy widow from town, who had helped with orphanage babies before, had been employed to look after Molly and Rocky. And because Miss Trinkleberry named children after the clothes or carriers they arrived in, like Moses Wicker, who had been found in a Moses basket, or Satin Night, who had come dressed in a nightie with a satin bows. Molly and Rocky were given exotic names too. Molly's surname was Moon. Molly's surname Moon had come from Moon's marshmallows, which had been printed in pink and green on the side of a cardboard box cradle. And when Miss Trinkleberry found a lolly stick in the box, she called the baby Lolly Moon. And after Miss Addison forbade Lolly as a name, Lolly Moon became Molly Moon. Rocky's name came directly from his red pram. On its hood had been written, "The Scarlet Rocker." Rocky was solid in build, like a rock, and very calm. This calmness came from the dreamy quality he had. But it was different to Molly's. Molly daydreamed to escape, whereas Rocky's dreaminess was sort of pondering. He wondered about the odd world he saw about him. Even as a baby, he would often be found lying happily in his cot, thinking and humming to himself. His deep, husky voice, together with his good looks, made Miss Trinkleberry say that one day he'd be a rock star, singing love songs to his ladies. So Rocky Scarlet, the name she had given him, turned out to suit him very well. Miss Trinkleberry wasn't very clever, but her sweet centre made up for her simple nature. And it was very lucky that she had nannied Rocky and Molly, because With only bitter Miss Alderson in charge, perhaps they would have grown up thinking thinking the whole world was bad, and have turned bad themselves. Instead, they were bounced on the fat knee of Miss Trinkleberry, and they fell asleep to her singing, and from her they learned kindness. She made them laugh and wiped their eyes when they cried, and at night, even if ever asked why they had been doorstep babies, she told them they were orphans because a naughty cuckoo had knocked them out of their nest. Then she'd sing them a mysterious lullaby that went like this: "Forgive little birds that brown cuckoo for pushing you out of your nests. It's what Mamma Cuckoo was taught to do. She taught that pushing is the best." If Rocky or Molly ever felt cross with their parents, whoever they were, for abandoning them, Miss Trinkleberry's song would make them feel better. But Miss Trinkleberry didn't live at the orphanage any more. As soon as Molly and Rocky were out of nappies, she had been sent away. Now she only came back once a week to help with the cleaning and the laundry. Rocky and Molly wished for more doorstop babies to arrive, so that Miss Trinkleberry could return, but none ever came. Small children arrived, but walking and talking, and to save money, Miss Addison used Molly and Rocky as nannies for them. Now Ruby, the youngest child in the orphanage, was 5, and she had stopped wearing nappies ages ago, even at night. Night was drawing in. In the distance, Molly heard a muffled squawk of the cuckoo clock in Miss Addison's room, striking 6. "We're really late," she said, tearing her dressing gown from the hook on her door. "She's going to have a tantrum," Rocky agreed, and they sprinted down the passage. The 2 children sped expertly along the obstacle course that was the route to downstairs, a journey they'd made 1,000 times before. They skidded round a corner on the polished linoleum floor and jumped down the long stairs. Quietly and out of breath, they tiptoed across the checkered stone floor of the hall, past the TV room, and towards the oak-panelled assembly room. They slunk in. 9 children, 4 of them under 7 years old, were lined up along the walls. Molly and Rocky joined the end of the line, near 2 friendly 5-year-olds, Ruby and Jinx. Hoping that Miss Addison hadn't reached their names on the register yet, Molly glanced at some of the unfriendly older faces opposite her. Hazel, Hacker's Sly, the meanest girl in the orphanage, narrowed her eyes at Molly. Gordon Boyles made the motion of cutting his throat with an imaginary knife. "Ruby Abel," read Miss Alderstone. "Yes, Miss Alderstone," piped up tiny Ruby beside Molly. "Gordon Boyles." "Here, Miss Alderstone," said Gordon, making a face at Molly. "Jinx Ames." Ruby prodded Jinx in the ribs. "Yes, Miss Alderson," he answered. "Robin Fibbin." "Here, Miss Alderson," said the tall, thin boy who stood next to Gordon, eyeing Molly maliciously. "Hazel Hackersly." "Here, Miss Alderson." Molly was relieved. Her name was next. "Jerry Oakley." "Here, Miss Alderson," said the 7-year-old Jerry, thrusting his hand into his pocket where he could feel his pet mouse trying to escape. "Cynthia Redmond." "Here, Miss Alderstone," said Cynthia, winking at Hazel. Molly wondered when her own name would pop up. "Craig Redmond." "Here, Miss Alderson," grunted Cynthia's twin. Miss Alderson seemed to have forgotten Molly. She was relieved. "Gemma Patel." "Here, Miss Alderson." "Rocky Scarlet." "Here," Rocky said, his voice wheezing. Miss Alderson slammed the register shut. "As usual, Molly Moon is not here." "I am here now, Miss Alderson." Molly could hardly believe it. Miss Alderson must have read her name out first, intentionally, to catch her out. "Now that doesn't count," said Miss Alderson, her lips twitching. "You'll be on the washing-up duty tonight. Edna will be very pleased to have the night off." Molly squeezed her eyes taut with regret. The idea that something special might happen to her tonight was fading fast. The evening was obviously going to be just like so many others, full of trouble. Evening vespers began as usual. This was when a hymn was sung and prayers were said. Normally, Rocky's voice boomed above everyone else's, but today he sang quietly, trying to get his breath back. Molly hoped he wasn't going to have a bad winter riddled with the wheezing asthma attacks. And then the evening proceeded, as it always did, 365 days a year. After the last blessing prayer, the dinner gong sounded, and the heavy dining room door swung open. Girls and boys shuffled through, welcomed tonight by a disgusting smell of old fish. They had seen the fish often enough, lying in plastic crates in the alley outside the kitchen, scuttling with flies and beetles, smelling as if it had been there all week, and everyone knew that Edna, the orphanage cook, would have baked the fish in a greasy, thick cheese and nut packet sauce to disguise its rotten taste, a trick she'd learnt in the Navy. There Edna stood, now broad and muscly, with her curly grey hair and her flattened nose, ready to make sure every child ate up. With the tattoo of a sailor on her thigh, although it was only a rumour, and her terrible language, Edna was like a grumpy pirate. Her temper lay like a sleepy dragon inside her, a temper that was fierce and fiery if woken up. Every single child felt nervous and sick as they stood in queue and made their excuses while Edna slopped out smelly helpings. "I'm allergic to fish, Edna." "Load of bleeding codswallop," came Edna's gruff reply, and she wiped her nose on her overall sleeves. "It's codswallop," Molly whispered to Rocky, looking down at her fish. The ordinary evening was nearly over. All that was left before bed was Molly's washing up punishment. As usual, Rocky offered to help her. "We can make a song about washing up. Besides, upstairs, I'd only have Gordon and Roger trying to bait me." "They're only jealous of you. Why don't you just go up and wallow them for once?" said Molly. "I can't be bothered." But you hate washing up, and so do you. You'll get it over quicker if I help you." So, on this ever-so-ordinary night, the pair set off for the basement pantry. But Molly had been right. A strange thing was going to happen tonight, and it was about to take place. It was cold in the basement, with dripping pipes overhead and the vents in the wall that let mouldy-smelling cold air and mice. Molly turned on the tap, which spluttered lukewarm, whilst Rocky went to fetch the washing-up liquid. Molly could hear Edna grumbling over in the passage as she trundled the trolley load of 11 smelly fish plates down the tunneled slope towards the pantry. Molly crossed her fingers that Edna would just leave the crockery trolley and go, although it was more likely that she would come up into the pantry and get cross. That was more Edna's style. Rocky arrived with washing up liquid. He squirted some into the sink, pretending he was in one of their favorite TV adverts. "Oh, Mama," he said to Molly, "why are your hands so soft?" Molly and Rocky often acted out the adverts from the telly. They could do scores of them, word for word, pretending to be the advert people. Made them laugh. "So soft?" replied Molly whimsically. "It's because I use thus washing-up liquid, darling. Other brands are simply murderous. Only Bubble-A-Lot is kind." Suddenly, Edna's dinosaur hand came down on Molly's, shattering their make-believe world. Molly shied sideways, expecting an earful of insults. But instead, a sickly sweet voice said in her ear, "I'll do that, dearie. Off you go now and play." Dearie? Molly didn't think that she could have heard Edna right. Edna had never ever spoken nicely to her. Normally, Edna was plain horrid and gristly, but now she was smiling. An unnatural, snaggly tooth smiled. "But Miss Addison's—" "Don't worry about that," said Edna. "You just go and relax. Go and watch that lovely blasted telly or something." Molly looked at Rocky, who was looking just as confused. They both looked at Edna. The change in her was amazing as tulips growing out of the top of the head would have been. And that was the first thing that happened that week. End of chapter 1.